You're listening to Females in Fantasy, a podcast elevating the voices of women authors of science fiction and fantasy who write about kick-ass heroines. I am your host, Brianna Da Silva, and this is Season 3, Episode 1. Now, you may have noticed that this episode is a bit longer than normal, and if you're wondering that perhaps this is the new style of Females in Fantasy, that they're all going to be an hour long, don't worry, this is actually just an exception because the conversation that I'm having today with Francina Simone is one that we found really didn't work in a shorter time period. There's a lot of nuance and complexity to the subject at hand, and we really wanted to do it justice. And what is that topic that we are going to address today? It is book controversies, or in other words, cancel culture, which is this trend of unpublishing books, or at least calling for them to be unpublished, due to controversial handlings of representation or sensitive topics such as racism, sexism, etc. This trend that's been kind of happening in the book community has come more into the spotlight lately, with a couple examples in recent months where a controversy led to some books being pulled before they were published. Specifically, they were Blood Air and A Place for Wolves, which were two YA books, YA standing for young adult or teen literature. And when this happened, it really brought up a heated public conversation online around free speech, what constitutes criticism versus censorship, who is allowed to tell certain stories, what constitutes an authentic experience, such as, is there a universally true or correct way to talk about race or oppression or trauma? I'm sure imagine it was a pretty heated conversation. Now, when Francina and I recorded this, it was a couple months ago. So some of the things we talked about are a little bit dated now. For example, since we recorded this conversation, the author of one of those books, Blood Air, has decided to publish her book after all. So the conversation has ramped up a little bit again, which coincidentally works well for the release of this episode. Wherever you stand on this issue, or if you're new to it and you don't stand anywhere at all yet, I sincerely hope you approach this episode with an open mind and, just enter in the conversation. Like if there's any way that you disagree with us, I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to know if there are some things perhaps that we're missing or things that we haven't considered. Seriously, tweet at me, email me. You can contact me at femalesinfantasy@gmail.com or on Twitter. And, I may do another episode if there's any sort of things I need to follow up with. On that note, one last thing before we get into the episode. Even though Francine and I spent an hour talking about this, there were still some things that we never really got to. And so there will be another episode coming out in a month, this one with Nicole Pierman, and we'll be talking about some more things related to the subject as well. So don't think that this is all that can be said. All right, let's get into it. Here's my conversation with Francina on book controversies. Welcome, Francina, to the Females in Fantasy podcast. How are you doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me. Yay.
Yay. I'm so excited to have you on the show. Okay, so as I always do, let's just start this off by introducing yourself, telling everyone about you, how you first started writing, and just whatever you feel is important to share.
Okay. So my name's Francina Simone. And so far, I'm the author of the Guardians trilogy, which is so far just 2 books right now. And it's a paranormal romance series. And it's about love and loss. And that's kind of one of the main themes that I love writing about, and YA specifically. I mean, my life is kind of boring, so I'll speed past. I was born in Germany, but I spent most of my childhood in Orlando. And so I'm a city person, but I live in Idaho right now. So it's a contradiction, but I lived in Orlando for a really long time. So now I'm very into writing YA contemporaries that involved living in the city, which is funny because I never thought I'd write anything like that. I always wanted to write fantasy growing up, but I was actually it all started for me when I was 17 or 16. And I was in this AP US history class, and we were supposed to be practicing our essays and writing on the Gettysburg Address. And I was the worst student ever, especially for that class. So all I did was sit down and I wrote this prologue to this fantasy book about this boy who just woke up and his alarm went off, but he there was somebody else in the house and he was freaking out, and he ended up traveling to this other world. And I was just okay, this is cool. And I kept that, and I ended up writing. That was my first jump into writing. I loved reading before that all the time, and I've always wanted to write, but never actually sat down and did anything. And that was the first time. So it's funny now because something I can't really talk about at all yet, but I'm writing YA contemporaries now, which is funny, but I still live. And I always joke, like everything I write has like a little touch of magic in it because I live very much in the fantasy world. So as of today, the most interesting, I guess, thing about me now is that like I'm working on like a middle grade fantasy about this little girl who's a witch, but she can walk through worlds, but she has to find like a new destiny because she failed her entrance exams to like go to like witch school. So, instead of like being able to like go to the school and getting her letter, she could say, "You're not allowed. Try again like in 5 years."
So, a little, switch on the trope, right?
Yeah. So like, I'm really like, that's kind of where I'm at right now. And I'm having so much fun like doing that. So right now I'm in YA, but with contemporary for a little while. And then kind of exploring my fantasy side with middle grade.
Yeah. And you're also a YouTuber.
Yeah.
Which is how I discovered you, actually.
Yeah. It's so weird because I don't realize, like, I live at home, obviously, but like I spend a lot of my time just sitting at home writing or just like taking care of my kids or just like trying to like create the like fill up the creative well. And so like sometimes I make YouTube videos and I'm trying to be like on a much more regular and consistent schedule now. But it's when people are like, "You're a YouTuber," I'm like, "Am I?" All I do is sit in front of the camera and I'm like, you know what? This is kind of something I'm thinking about. And I'm tired of just thinking about it in circles with myself. So let me just like put it out online. And I do. And now it's like, it's a thing. But yeah, like YouTube channel, Francina Simone, check me out.
Yeah. So one of the things that I wanted to talk with you about is a subject that I've been personally thinking about a lot lately. It's been like something that I've been really deeply concerned about. And I kind of felt like I was going crazy because I didn't see anyone else really talking about it, which I realized was more because I just wasn't on the right places on social media. And then I found some of your videos and I was like, oh, awesome. Okay. I'm not the only one noticing these things. So before I get into the topic, though, I kind of want to put down some like, not ground rules. What would I put at this? Like just to establish some things to make sure that they're obvious, to show that like things that we both agree on and stuff that I think would be obvious to anyone that's listened to my podcast. But the sky is blue. Also, diversity is good. Yay! We want diverse characters. We want to have more diverse authors published. We're for that. Yay! Representation is good. Woo! We want more humanizing and authentic and empowering representation. All these things should be obvious, right? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I assume you would agree with those statements, yes?
Yeah. Like that's always the thing. Like I feel like we have to say that, especially like a lot of people have like hard feelings on one side or the other, and it's like, how does that like? I thought we all had this understanding.
Yes. So I wanted to make sure that's understood because some people might misunderstand, this conversation without making that context really clear. So one of the things I think both of us kind of criticize is more the way that some of these things are being discussed right now, particularly on certain online communities, and especially because the way the discourse around these subjects has been going has the potential to backfire and has the potential to kind of like have the opposite effect and have less diversity and good representation rather than more. And so that's kind of more, I think, at least for me, that's where my concern over this is stemming from. So yeah, would you also agree with that?
Yeah. Like, yeah, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes. So, and again, we also are really hoping that no one gets defensive over this and just listens to the whole thing first. But yeah, so let's talk about this. Let's talk about kind of some of these problems that we've been seeing. It's important to be aware of these things too, if you're not aware of these things. So do you want to explain or would you like me to start?
I can go because like I can talk all day.
Great.
So like for me, because I know we're going to talk about, for the most part, like critiquing art and where the line is. And especially in this new age, are we dealing with these things? Art being harmful versus art just being art and being able to critique it and it existing, whether it's harmful or not. And so like I stand on, I will just admit up front, I stand on the very hard line that art is art and it's there to be critiqued. It's not there to be censored or there to be, I want to say like, because I know a lot of people have the problem with the word censor because there are very real countries where censorship is very much controlled by the government. And then there's cultural censorship. Like there are certain taboos that we have in cultures that aren't against the law, but culturally, like cursing in public is considered not okay. So if you want to be seen as a person who's respectful, you shouldn't be able to curse. Like, you don't walk into a store and just use like foul language, like left and right, like screaming. Like there are certain social taboos. And I think we're starting to fall into the category where culturally we're creating these social taboos around art. And I don't know if art has a place in culture because it's funny. One of my fantasy stories that the whole nother story on that. But in one of them, there's a character and he's like a court dancer. He's like considered an artist. And he's the only person in this kingdom or who's allowed in court to be completely honest. So there's a part where he calls a boy who's a prince. He says, I'm glad the little lords are like able to come join us. And like no one else would get away with saying that. But because he's an artist, he's allowed to point out hypocrisy. And he's allowed to point out all of the things that people do that are wrong. And he's allowed to call you out of your name when you're behaving out of your name per se. And like anybody else would have been like smacked for it, but like people respect him for that. And it's kind of like the court gesture. It's my play on the court gesture, as in the gesture is allowed to like make fun of the king because he's the only one and he's allowed to point out those things because he's an artist in his own way. You know, he's like the comedian, which is still art. And so I think that there needs to be space for that because we can't have growth without it.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I do like, and that's all saying, I only ever talk about this discussion really in young adult because that's where I'm the most versed. Like I don't pretend to know what's going on in adult fantasy or in the romance genre. Like I watch from the sidelines like tea, but you know, like I don't pretend to know. And I do understand that in young adult, a lot of people are talking about, well, it's children and children need good and positive representation, et cetera, et cetera. And to me, it's like, no, children need art. They need to be able to see something that they disagree with and be able to articulate why. They need to be able to see things that they agree with and that are healthy. And for one kid, that could be something completely different for another child. Like some kids live in urban areas and their lives are completely different than kids who live in the suburbs. But kids in the suburbs may find that kind of representation of the urban life extremely like hurtful and wrong and stereotypical. Whereas another kid can look at that and be like, that's me. I finally see myself. And that's not, you know, this representation isn't wrong. Because I also feel that in some cases, when you say that something is wrong, you're saying that people who really are like that and who do identify with that kind of stuff are wrong. And, you know, there's no monolith.
To jump in real quick, it's like there's also the point where I feel like this kind of over infantilizes teenagers. It's like teenagers, yes, they're kids, but they're also adults. They're in this weird little in-between stage, you know, where we all kind of, I don't think everyone technically becomes adult at the exact same moment. But somewhere around that general range are becoming an adult. And it's like, well, people at that age are fully capable of thinking for themselves and they're fully capable of, you know, having their own opinions. And it's kind of like, it's not healthy to like overprotect kids and to say like, oh, we're just going to try to keep all the bad things away from them because it's like, well, they're going to encounter them in the world eventually anyway. So it's much better to prepare them for that and to prepare them to be able to engage with things critically, you know? And so I think the whole like, oh, we need to protect them, I think is the wrong impulse for multiple reasons. And then also too, that thing about representation, that's a really important thing where it's like, no one's a monolith, right? No matter how down you narrowed, you know, like every blind East Asian lesbian doesn't have the exact same experience, right? Like no matter how many descriptions I put on there, we're still individuals. And so it's not like you can have a single version of representation that is true for everyone. And so what may feel offensive to one person or really hurtful may also feel very like authentic and realistic to someone else. And so the concern is kind of the way that a lot of this conversation is going is it doesn't have room for that nuance. It doesn't have room for the understanding that you can't have this, you know, set in stone. I mean, maybe you can, but I haven't encountered it yet. I haven't seen an example yet where you can have the set in stone. This is universally bad representation and like everyone that relates to, you know, would hate it or, you know, I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah. Well, for me, like, there's another thing that like art has another layer onto it. And it's like either you're good at art or you're not. Or either you're like, and if you're not, either you're on the path of becoming good or you're stagnant or you just suck at it. Like, you know what I mean? Like there are some things you're good at with your art than in other things. Like there's no reason why I would say like a landscape painter should never, ever try doing sketches like of the human body. Right. But they're probably going to suck at it at some point, or maybe they might be like naturally good at it, or maybe they're somewhere in between. But for me, like going back to writing, because that's like abstract, but like, I'm always so confused why I'm not confused. I know it's because a lot of people are readers and even some authors, and I don't mean this in this like the least shadiest way. A lot of authors, especially debut authors, like a lot of us, and I say us because I am technically, I'm not going to put myself on a pedestal, but a lot of us are not like we're not masters. I don't care who you could pick the best writer ever in the universe to you, and they're still not a master of their craft. And they might be very good at it. And to me, there are even two levels of writing. There's writing craft and there's storytelling. And some people are really good at the craft and horrible at storytelling. And representation needs you to be pretty good at both to be able to carry out nuances. So for me, I've never seen a universally bad depiction that wasn't meant to be malicious. However, I have seen writing that intended to be good, but because it missed all of the nuances or didn't quite understand the truth of the subject, it got all of the subject wrong, or it said a lot of things that it might know inherently. I could inherently know what it's like to be, and I'm going to pick something that even is close to me. I could inherently know what it's like to be a Black guy because I know lots of Black men. I've known lots of Black boys, but I'm going to inherently get a lot of things wrong when it comes to masculinity. And masculinity is what it means to be American. Masculinity is what it means to be a Black American. And masculinity is what it means to be a Black American in a very specific community. I'm going to miss all of those nuances because I didn't have to grow up navigating. And so I could become great at crafting and really think about those things and dive deep. It's going to take me a long time. And I could probably do it. I'm not saying that nobody can. But without that kind of work and effort put into it, and building those skills, because it doesn't matter how much effort you put in, you still need the skills. Without the skill level to be able to pull it off, I could go in with all great intentions and still come out crappy. But I wouldn't say that it's like, no, it's universally bad. No, it's just bad writing.
That's a really good way to put it. I love how you say that. You said that before in some of your videos. It's like when you get something like that, if it's like a specific experience that people have and someone tries to write about it and they mean well, but they get it a little bit wrong. It's a failure of writing. It's not a moral failing. And I think that's kind of the important distinction. That person isn't necessarily a bad person because they messed up. It's more that they should have spent some more time with that. They should have had some more feedback or whatever. And also sometimes there have been books that have been criticized for things like this that did get feedback too. And that's kind of the problem is where maybe they did try to put in the effort, but they still missed something for some people, because it's not a monolith.
Yeah. And I say this all the time is like the hardest part about like even being a sensitivity reader or getting somebody who sensitivity reads is you have to pick someone who not only understands their own experience, but is willing to talk honest truth about their own experience, because nuances require you to know the good, the bad, and the ugly parts of yourself. The parts that like saying, in one of my YA contemporaries, a girl has a crush on a boy and he seems to like this girl who's white. And so she automatically assumes that maybe he doesn't see her that way because she's Black. And so like, that's a truth that a lot of Black girls do understand, is that in the background, that idea of maybe it's because of that. And it might not be. I mean, like usually 9 times out of 10, it's probably not. Like there are people do have preferences and stuff for sure. But it's usually a lot of other different things. But that layer and that lens, it's like you have to be able to admit that you feel that way first. And then you have to admit why you feel that way and know where does that come from in that character. It can't just be from the outside because it's like that because people feel that way about Black girls versus, white girls. Like, yeah, you can say that, but that's not the truth. That's a piece of the truth. But it's like the iceberg, like there's a little bit above and there's a bunch of it below, and all the stuff below, nobody wants to dive into that cold Antarctic water to figure out all of the ugly deeps and depths of the iceberg. And so when you get someone who does read for you, it's like, do they even know their parts of their ugly and why those things exist and where they got them from and who they got them from and the depth of that? Because that's where all of the work comes in. And that's why I don't advise people to stay in their lane, but I do say to people like all the time that you have to know what it is, what lane you're in, and know the issues that you're dealing with and all of the stuff that you are possibly missing and how to gauge. Like I was getting feedback once about a guy's perspective on something. And even though I wasn't writing from a guy's perspective, I just wanted to know the general, like, would you ever do this or that? And I realized that the guy I was asking had never been in love. So I realized that he wasn't really able to have the same idea as the guy character I was writing who had been in love and who was willing to go through all of these like hoops and ladders. Whereas somebody who hasn't ever been in love doesn't quite understand it the same. So it's like, that's hard. It's hard. Even getting sensitivity readers is hard. I never say that it's impossible. Don't do it, because I've read like Jay Kristoff from Nevernight writes the great sexual experience of a female and a young female at that. So I would never say like, stay in your lane, don't ever write outside of it. Nope. Never like going to say that. But I am going to say that if you're going to do it, you do need to like have a skill that goes into it. And I mean,
yeah, takes skill.
Yeah. And we all have like internalized prejudices against all sorts of things and all sorts of people for all sorts of crazy reasons that all go back to just our culture and like the way that we're raised in society to believe very specific things. Like how many of us have grown up saying tone deaf and are gypped, I've been gypped, and not really understanding where that came from and why. And then, you feel like somebody's being sensitive when they're like, I'm a gypsy and we really don't like it when you say gypped. Please stop saying that. Like it's rude. Or like someone who's saying, saying tone deaf is a little offensive. Maybe change your vocabulary there. Like we're automatically going to be like, whoa. Like I don't mean it any specific way. But then at the same time, we have to ask ourselves, well, what culturally and socially that is acceptable and why? And is it somebody being oversensitive? Is it not somebody being oversensitive? Am I being too sensitive and like diving and questioning my social upbringing? Because cultures and like we hold them up high, because without your culture, who are you, right? You're just a wandering vagabond with no home, no feet. You're just a nomad and you mean nothing to anybody in the world without any type of traditions or cultures, right? Because how do you communicate with other people? I know, right? But it can, and it can feel that way too.
We're all part of multiple groups actually in a modern society. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, and what is the best way to define your group? By making sure you know what you're not. Like I know, and in my group, we believe in X, Y, and Z. And if these other things don't fit in that, they don't belong in our group. And so we get sensitive when people make us question our culture because they're making us question our entire identity. So that's like, it's so much to unpack there with like, and that's why I'm like, we can't just make it about not writing, don't do it, or critiquing like art. Like it's a more like you have to achieve some moral like standing and ground, because sometimes screwing up makes a whole question and creates a conversation around the art that isn't necessarily about the art, but about the society that we're in. And that brings us into a new like age. There's so much to it, Matt. That's why I'm always against the policing of things, because I'm like, there's so many conversations we can have. We just have to be calm enough to have those conversations.
Right. And conversation is really like one of the most important things about this that I feel isn't valued enough. Just like the value of being able to have conversations about these things and having open discourse. But the thing is that, so let's make this a little bit more specific. Sometimes when these kind of book criticisms happen, and they do often happen on YA book Twitter, they happen more as an attack on an author versus a discussion of the art itself, right? Where it's like, because this thing exists in this art, it is a reflection of the artist's values. And it's like, well, maybe it is, but maybe it isn't. It's not always that simple, and you don't always know. And so that's why it's better if we can have this as a conversation. But the thing that people often react to when you say things like that, when you're like, hey, this seems like you're attacking this person. This doesn't seem right. Can we do this another way? And then they'll say, hey, you're tone policing me. Like, I should be able to be angry. It's like, yeah, you can, but that's kind of a different thing. So how would you differentiate that? Like, what is the difference here between tone policing, which I do think is not necessary and annoying? If someone's angry and you say, hey, don't be angry. It's like, we're entitled to our own emotions. But at the same time, if you're trying to affect change and you're trying to change someone's mind, you're trying to, impact the culture or whatever it is in a positive way, there are certain ways that if you frame your conversation, you'll be a lot more effective,
Yeah.
So what would you say on that?
So I have very interesting thoughts on tone policing, because once I was called a tone policer for telling people that if you're going to be an asshole, sorry for young viewers, then, at least be honest about it. My thing is, I believe that natural consequences always win out over any type of fabricated consequences. And so if you're going to engage in someone and you're angry, what is the outcome that you're looking for? Are you looking for an apology? Or are you looking to have, obviously you're not looking for discourse on it because you're angry. You're looking for some type of justice or to get something off your chest, which is fine. Like, to bring up Blood Air recently, that was one that I had a big issue with because of Like the fact that we've already been same old rodeos, like different horse. Like, is that a saying? Anyways, like,
I don't know. It is now.
I know. We've already been down that road, right? With Carve the Mark, where I'm not even going to go into that. But with Blood Heir, the whole point was that some people had arcs and some people found the blurb to be anti-Black without talking about the arc. Some people found the arc itself to have like anti-Black sentiments and to like have plagiarism and all these things. And my thing was, okay, that's cool. Write a review. Like, where else? Why does it need to go anywhere else? I just found it very strange. There's something unsettling about the fact that reviews aren't enough. And you can always tell in the tone that a review isn't enough when people have to bring in like I don't know how to explain it, because I haven't figured.
It's like they want to stop it.
Yeah,
they see something, they don't like it, and rather than recognizing this is art and it's out in the world, and that means you get to engage with it as a consumer. Instead, it's like, this really, it unsettles me, it makes me angry, whatever it is. I have an emotional reaction, it hurts me, whatever it is. So I don't want it to exist. I want it to go away. Like, that seems to be the impulse. Rather than critiquing it, it crosses this line into like this impulse towards destruction. And a lot of people would deny that, but that is what I observe.
Because my thing is, it's the nature of the beast of Twitter is very different than Goodreads, right? Like on Goodreads, we can read bad reviews and people expect to read bad reviews on there. They expect to read good ones and they want to make informed opinions. But Twitter, the nature of that beast is completely different because it's not a place for discourse. It's just a place for information sharing. And there's something, okay, I guess what I want to say is like, when you behave like a duck for so long and you quack like a duck, you can't turn around and bark like a dog and say, I'm not a duck. Like, you know what I mean? So even if with Blood Heir, the intention wasn't to get it pulled, the behavior and the precedent set before that, the conversation set before that, the people involved in these conversations who say things like, you shouldn't have to read the book. If it's racist, why can't you believe people who say that? You're hurting them by reading the book. You're hurting them by needing to make your own opinion. Why isn't that their opinion is valid enough? Why is it that someone who said it's great and doesn't have any problems is more valuable? And I'm like, well, nobody's saying that either opinion is valuable. I'm saying my opinion is more valuable than any of your opinions because I don't trust any of you people.
You're an individual and you can think for yourself. And that's like what's not acknowledged enough, that it's like also people, even in these really, really contentious, important things, you can have people that share the same relevant identity that can reasonably disagree.
Yeah. And that's my thing is like, people should have discourse about it. I think having a conversation, like we all know that this is the hard part, is we all know what conversations look like. And we all know what slick conversations look like when people are trying to make you do something without saying it because they don't want you to think that they're doing that. And we all know what that kind of dialogue looks like. And we all know how slippery the slope is and how you can't really react in very specific ways. But I always ask and look into question, what is the reaction that's being asked of me here? Like, if it's just a review, this is this person's experience, and they're not asking me to read it or not read it. They're telling me their experience. But on Twitter, we're doing like, you go on Twitter with a picture. Like, have you seen this like girl had a picture and there was like, she was on a Hawaii vacation or something like that. I think it was a cruise. And she like, there was this Asian girl in the picture. There's a Black girl and an Asian girl. And she's like, can you help me find this girl? We were 10. We're like 20 now. And I just want to find her.
Oh,
Twitter,
yeah.
do your work. And
I saw that.
Like,
Twitter is awesome for that.
Yeah. But the key term is Twitter, do your work. What work does Twitter do? Twitter either builds something, it shares information, or it tears things down. And we all know this. So when you go to Twitter, to have a conversation with people about information that they don't have, but you do have, you're essentially putting yourself in the form of an authority on that conversation. And you're telling them that what you believe is the thing, especially when you're not telling people that, this is my experience and, I'm interested to see how other people feel about this because this is what I've gotten from it. When you come at, this is the same thing that's happening again. Oh my gosh, we're like at it. Like, how many times do we have to fight back? And how many times do we have to talk about these issues for people to like realize we need, like proper LGBT representation? Like anytime you say that, and that very few people have the information that you have to be a part of the conversation, yet you're inviting the masses to be a part of that conversation. It's like, it's a little dishonest.
And you're talking specifically about if someone has an ARC, which for anyone that doesn't know what that is, that's like an advanced reader copy of the book. Is that what you're referring to? There are people that have read this book. Very few other people have, and they're kind of leading a conversation with a bunch of people that haven't read the book and that shouldn't technically know what's in it. But we're supposed to trust this person because for whatever reason.
Yeah. And it's like, but like, I'm interested for your opinion. Like, by no means am I saying people can't review them. Like, I want to know your opinion, but that's just it. Like, don't have call to actions. Like, you know, when you're inflamed about a situation, you're essentially already having a call to action, because you're not just discussing it. You're discussing it like with a need for justice. And when you don't say what that justice is that you want, you're just being dishonest, because we can all see what you want. You know, it's plain as day. Even if you don't say, books like this shouldn't exist, when you lay out all of the groundwork for that and expect the masses to just, you know, like, it's not even a review. It's not, we haven't even gone there to find out more about the book. You came to me. I was completely unaware, just scrolling, and you came to me about it. You know, so it's very interesting. It's like, it's the forum. And I think that's the main issue that I have is, you know, if I make a YouTube video about my opinion on Blood Heir, it's like, you have to come to me to find it. Like, you have to be specifically looking for that, or specifically like my opinions on books. But if I go on Twitter and like 400 people share what I have to say, you know, you didn't come to me. I'm asking people to put me out and make me reach out to you. It's that whole relationship that Twitter has with other people and how we use it to talk about these books, even though other people haven't read them. Because I guess my main issue is that this always happens with books that are in ARC form. This doesn't happen with books that are available to the masses to read. And then people can have discussions, because that's when you have the most valuable discussions, is when a majority of people are able to partake in it, not when the majority of people you're talking to are just listening to you and then like taking your word and spreading it because they have read something that feels very concrete and divisive, and not divisive, but definitive. You know, like, you're making very definitive statements about a book about how it's done this and that. And then you start sharing snippets out of context to prove your very specific points. It's like, I don't have the whole context to know whether or not you're a good reader, because that could turn out to be the case with Carve the Mark. Like,
yeah, you did a good video about that showing, because you did read the book.
Yeah. And I was like, you know, the person who like, and I can't remember who it was, but the person who made this entire article about it, their whole point was that the good people were Black and the bad people were white. And I was like, you know, the whole book makes a point of showing that you can't tell the difference between who's a part of what culture unless you start talking to them, or unless they start showing physical markers like I think it's the Shotet and the Thuve and the Shotet, you know, they mark themselves with like, you know, when they like do pain and stuff. So unless you see something like that, you wouldn't even be able to know it. I mean, for all we know, it could just be like a bicycle scar, you know, like you fell down the stairs and you like a stab or something. But I mean, like, they even dress very similar. They like, everything was very similar about them. And they're such a mixed and diverse society that it's literally like saying people from versus like New York versus California. Which one is which? There was no color definition. And I was like, wow, the whole argument is based on that. Lots of people didn't have this book to even, you know, be able to say, wow, that's stupid. And yet these claims are being made as definitive. You're cherry picking very specific instances about very specific characters while ignoring all of the other characters that completely like make your argument false. And so that's like one of my main issues is like,
yes, it's dishonest.
Yeah. And there's something very dishonest about all of it. I think natural consequences, and we're seeing that now with don't tone police, just let people be angry. It's like, how many people are actually involved with the book community these days? Like, a lot of people have fallen off of the conversations. I mean, I think I saw last year that book numbers were better for young adult books. Or no, I think books in general sold better. But young adult in general as an industry, the numbers have been bad. Like, books are selling, but they're not selling nearly as well as they used to. And I mean, there are many, many, many reasons for that. It's not just call out culture. That's like a tiny, tiny, tiny like issue. Like the reasons are there are no big books, you know, no big blockbusters that are like really driving people into the store. But another issue is that we're not growing organically, because every time people come into the book community, it's hostile. It's just it. That's what it is. It is hostile, whether you want to agree with it or not, whether you are okay with being hostile or not. It is killing the growth. Like, there are barely any teens on Twitter as is. So we know that they're not coming into the community, and especially not via Twitter.
Yeah. It's like mostly adults that are having these arguments on Twitter.
And it's super hostile. And like, and back to what you said about infantiling, like teens, it's always very funny to me sorry, this is like, I'm just kind of jumping now because I said teens, but it's always very funny to me how we like make teens out to be babies when like not 20, 30 years ago, teens were expected to just read adult books. You had like the children's section. You had some books that were about teens, but like, let's be honest, it was all one section. And then you read adult books because if you wanted to read fantasy, sci-fi, or any type of genre fiction, you just went straight to adult. And where were the picket signs then? Where were the protesters? Protect the children. You know what I mean? Like, we didn't create YA because children needed protecting. We created it because Harry Potter was huge and brought in money, and publishing follows money. So, you know, that's always interesting to me. And then on top of that, like, you go on YouTube and you look at them, see what teens are doing and thinking and how they're expressing themselves. It's like, first of all, the teens aren't even, like, they're not barely buying books as is. Like, they're buying stuff that they hear of word of mouth. They're buying the big books, but they're not coming in and like really buying from the smaller unknown books that don't have the same visibility. And that's because they're not engaged with our community anymore. And it's because it's too adult focused. We're telling kids that they're too small to like know anything, treating them like they're 9-year-olds. Protect the babies.
Protect the small children. Yes. And then to kind of go back to the thing that I said at the very beginning of this interview is conversation. This has been more of a conversation than an interview. I usually have like specific questions that I ask people. And this time I was like, no, I'm not going to have any set structure. And is this thing about, you know, it being hostile. And then also the way that, how do I put this? One of the side effects of this kind of the call out culture and this sort of like impulse towards, you know, destroying the books and getting them off the shelves if you don't like them. And the thing is that the kind of, I think publishing at large, and especially, and even the YA world at large off of Twitter too, looks at that and is like, wow, that sucks. Like people generally don't see that as a good thing. And my concern is that two things. So one, when the association in the broader culture is like people calling for diversity and representation, are also these people being really hostile and being really like destructive or whatever. Like that's concerning to me to have that be associated, because then it's like, well, that's what people are going to hear when you're starting to have these conversations about diversity and representation. It's like, okay, first of all, that's a bad association. Second of all, because the way that these attacks, I'll call them that because that's what they are, because they often are focused on the author rather than the art itself, it has created this culture of fear. And, you know, artists need, like you were talking about the, you know, the jest or whatever, like the artists of your culture need to be able to create without fear. They need to be able to go, you know, to the edges. They need to be able to go to the dark places and expose things and talk about things forthrightly. Like that's really important for a healthy culture, to have your artists be able to have no limits really to what they can talk about, and to be able to make mistakes too. Because that's the thing, like it's totally okay for us to point out when someone has made a mistake or when they've done something that is damaging, but we have to do it in a way that recognizes their humanity and doesn't create a fear around people being able to create. And so the thing is that my worry is that, and I think this has probably already started to happen, is that people are going to be intimidated to even try to write, as you said, out, quote unquote, outside of their lane, that people are going to be scared to write about these sort of important things and to be able to write about different characters. And that's like, because they don't want to mess up and they don't want to have people attack them. The mobs attack them on Twitter. And like, that is the exact opposite of what we all want.
Yeah. And I get these comments all the time on my channel is like, oh, I want to write this. Like, how do I write diversity? Or I was writing diversity, but I'm kind of scared. What do I do? And like, I mean, I'm a very, okay, like I try to be like the kindest person ever all the time. But I said that and I sound so snub. Like I try to be kind all the time. I mean, like one of my things is always like, either do it or don't do it. Like, you know, like I feel like you can't be an artist and be like a punk. You know what I mean? Like I say that with my fingerless gloves. You can't be a punk. No, but like there is some type of risk to art, right? Like you can't go diving into the dark ends without like accepting, you can't, like you have to not conquer fear, but like walk side by side of it. Like don't let it like step in front of you. Don't let it like drive the wheel. But at the same time, I do completely understand the idea of that's great. And that's what like artists do. But then we also have people who make money off of art, right? Like I'm one of those people. Like I'm a commercial writer, you know, I don't write literary fiction, and I don't mean to say that people who write literary fiction don't make money, but they're hard sells, you know, like it's very difficult to get the average person to like be into this this book that takes at least 5 minutes to explain, but like a very catchy book, you know, with a quick hook, you know, like anybody will go and read it and buy it. That's the money making industry. That's what keeps the other artists who are very like, who go on to move mountains, you know what I mean? Like culturally speaking, that's what keeps money in the reserves for them. And so I'm very interested in the fact that if we want the commercial people who are so front facing, that's usually like most of the media that we consume, you know what I mean? And if we want to see diversity there and not just in those like literary fiction pieces where like one person of one diverse, like one diverse sex, like, oh, you're the only blind person allowed to, like, what did you say earlier? Like the East Asian woman who is both a blind and a lesbian.
Blind East Asian lesbian, I think. I can't remember.
Like we've got one of those books. That's it. You know, like it's all closed
we got
out.
it. The end.
And like, you know, I'm going to go buy that one. We don't need you. Oh, you're not blind? Well, we still don't need you. We have enough East Asian right now. Like, and if we don't want that to keep happening and we want more like front facing stuff, you also have to let the people who make money, they're not that fearless. They just want to make money and they would prefer to be around people who are going to support that and not around people who are going to like, I don't know, like go over them with like a flea comb, you know, like looking for every little tick. Oh no, look what you did. And those people aren't going to write diversity because those people are terrified. And I don't blame them. I mean, not everybody's ballsy. I'm a commercial writer, but I consider myself pretty ballsy. I really don't care. I'll do anything and everything just for the fact of it's art and I want to explore those things. And I want to become a better person myself by exploring those things. But I know not everybody's like that. Some people are very quiet artists where they put everything into the paper and it can be very commercial, but they're also very like, you know, they can't like handle fame or craziness or any type of dialogue. And I don't know. I think it's just become so, like you said, it is hostile and it does create a place of fear. And in my experience, fear doesn't stop people from doing stuff. It stops people from doing things out in the open or openly or being open to new things or trying to be a part of this culture where we're changing and becoming more, I always say like we're becoming more global. Like I make this joke all the time that when I was like 10 or 15, when adults talked about like a global society, they were always like, you know, we're just going to have one government and we'll have no borders. And I'm like, what they meant was Twitter. We are global because of Twitter.
Oh, yes.
You know, nobody saw that coming.
The global time has come.
But nobody saw Twitter coming, right? Like we are a place without borders now. You just go on social media and that's it. But like, I feel like when people want to become part of this change and become part of this like more global type community, they're least likely to do it and they're most likely to stay and they're very like segregated off like nationalistic kind of very specific culture. Like if they're American culture, which is very white centric, they're more likely to just stay in that niche and write in that niche because at the end of the day, it does sell and it does make money. At the end of the day, we're not so culturally changed where that is like odd to people. You know what I mean? Like that is still very relevant and there is going to be no change. And people, like you said, are going to associate all of the diversity talks with like this negativity. I mean, even to a point, sometimes I do when I'm like, got to make another video about diversity. Oh, God. You know, it should be fun. It should be like, oh, I can't wait to talk about these books that are like, you know, cool and all this stuff. And it's funny because I read stuff like that. Like Leah Bardugo's Six of Crows is one of the first ones that I read in a long time that was just so casually diverse, you know? And I loved that. And there are tons of shows that are like that. Like I just watched this Netflix show called Sex Education, and it's very casually diverse. There's all sorts of stuff that is super casually diverse. And I do not like equate it to the diversity conversation at all. It's like separate because the diversity conversation is so like negative and it's so like, it feels so constrictive. Like it's not creative. It's not saying, you know, write this world and do these fun things. It's like, okay, you checked this box off. Let's see if you're qualified. And you're just like, oh, fuck. You know, like, oh, God, is it going to pass the Twitter test?
Yeah.
You're just shaking.
Exactly. The Twitter test. Yeah.
I know. So like, you know, I don't even put books that kind of talk about like issue books and stuff in the same category as fun things like Six of Crows, because in one, I have fun. It's casual and it represents me as a person who likes to see myself in a world that isn't full of anger. And the other ones are fairly like, they're angry. And there's no problem with that. It's just, if you're going to be angry, you have to ask yourself, like I said earlier, what is the outcome? Because you can be angry and vent, and then go to work and have like, these conversations that need to be had. And the conversations are with people who agree with us. Like nobody's saying go out and have a conversation with somebody who's like a Nazi, right? Like there are people out there who are like, I love everyone and I'm going to change these Nazis' hearts forever. And, good work for them. Yay. That's not me. I only talk to people who are like already on the same page because that's healthy. Talk about mental health, right? So it's like, I know you're having conversations with people who agree and people who have different perspectives, and we can all learn from those perspectives, even if that person doesn't, like, I always think if that person doesn't see something that I see that I think is an error, well, I'm interested to learn their perspective and their worldview of what part of their culture led them to believe that. And there's usually a lot more to unpack there than what I've assumed. And, that's how you grow. And it's just, it's good overall. You can have fun with those kind of conversations. So I think you can be angry, vent, and then have those conversations. Maybe you need to vent in private spaces first, and then, in the front facing, like, because Twitter is public. And when people act like it's not public, I'm always like confused. Like, are you kidding me? These are public conversations. Like, of course, The Guardian is going to pick it up.
Yeah. Oh yeah. People got so offended when so for people that don't know what she's referring to, there was with Blood Air, which was a book that recently had a lot of controversy. It ended up being noticed by like broader, bigger news agencies or whatever. And then people on Twitter were offended. They're like, oh, I can't believe they're writing, like, leave us alone. It's like, guys.
You literally went on Twitter.
Nothing you're doing. It's like if you were in like a public forum, essentially, and you were just like, and then you're like, oh my, I can't believe some news person wrote about me. It's like, okay. What, if you don't want them to write about you, maybe like talk with your friends in a living room or something. I don't know, and people were also offended by that because, it portrayed the community in a negative light. And it's like, okay, so if you're being seen in a negative light, maybe that's a time to sit back and kind of think about that criticism and like figure out if there's a reason for it,
Yeah, because I'm definitely aware and sensitive to the fact that like there are stereotypes and there is internalized racism when like, especially women of color come out and say something and they get pushed back. Like, of course, there is a whole dynamic there, but I'm still very much of the mind that like, I'm not saying that everybody will ever have my experience. I'm the only person, but I talk about diversity all the time. I even talk to people who have done things that I'm just like, oh God, oh God. And I've had conversations with people who are much older than me, like all sorts of different types of conversations around this, but I've never gotten pushback. And it's not because I go to people with like cupcakes and candy. I'm fairly a hard ass when I have conversations. I'm very direct and I'm very honest about stuff. And it's that honesty that I think makes other people see that I'm not trying to come at you in a very strange way or trying to paint you in a bad light, but you can't do that to me because I'm honest. And I don't know. I think because as a Black woman who has these conversations, and usually there's a lot of positive reaction and I can have conversations with people, like the only time that things are negative for me is when I get backlash from people who are for diversity, but think somehow I am against diversity because I'm like, or they call me a tone policer and I'm like, no, I called you an asshole. There's a difference.
Yeah, I'm like, you're being mean right now.
Yeah, like, I'm not policing your tone. I'm just saying that with that tone, my husband always says this. He says, you treat good people like good people and you treat assholes like assholes. And so you can't be an asshole and expect other people to treat you with kindness in return. And it's like, just, an eye for an eye. Both of you are going to end up blind. So like the outcome here isn't perfect and it's not positive. But if you want an eye for an eye, just know that you're going to lose an eye. Like you're going into this fight willing to fight. But if you're going into this wanting to have a conversation and to change things, then you need to have a conversation with like-minded people and then move forward with the face of change. You know what I mean? Like, and it doesn't need to be changing other people who don't do what you want. It can be like, I've been talking about the new adult genre recently about how, there's a space between young adult and adult. And there's this new era and style of writing and style of telling stories that adults who read Harry Potter growing up like this. And they can't really find it so readily in adult because adult is very in stereotyped, yes, as like literature written by old white men who were most likely dead or like extremely old. And it's like, of course, the whole section isn't like that. Those are just the staples. And because the staples have all that visibility, it's so hard to have books that are newer and written that are for the audience that we like are written for the audience that like young adult books, but they are adults. It's so hard for them to find those books. It's all about visibility. And I was saying, it's not about erasing fantasy. Like, we don't need anybody who likes classical fantasy to change. Like, no, it's beautiful in its own way, but you can have a new category, like step into a different space and curate that space. And that's what I'm saying. Like, you don't have to fight people who are like, I remember it used to go around that Sarah J. Maas was like, oh, she only writes white characters and kills off all the people of color and all of this stuff. And I'm like, okay, cool. Don't yell at her and tell her to change. If she wants to write those things, because maybe she does some real effed up stuff to all her characters. Maybe she doesn't want them to be people of color. Maybe she's not trying to make certain statements. Maybe she feels like she's writing in her own lane and writing outside of that isn't her comfort zone. Maybe she doesn't feel like she has a skill set to do that. And that is no shade or anything. And like, because she knows maybe she'll get dragged worse for that than not having them at all. And my thing is, instead of arguing with people who aren't doing what you want, why don't you create the space for all of the like-minded people to gather who do what it is that they want to do? And the more you focus on that and curate it, the bigger it becomes, because it's obviously there's money in it. And there are people who want to read these types of books. So just focus on that. Like, there's nobody's saying like to change anything else. You don't have to fight. You just have to love the space that you're in and it flourishes.
Yes. And it's like, similarly to that, there's this idea of, rather than trying to tell someone to do something differently, go and find the people that are doing what you want. And sure, so it's like, back up a little bit. So like, if you're a writer, your reaction to seeing media you don't like can be to go and write media that you do like. If you're a consumer and maybe you're not a writer, you're not an artist, then what you can do is you find that art or that, those movies or those books, whatever it is that are doing the thing that you want to be done, and then share them. Buy them, support those things with your money. Like your dollar goes a long way. Your retweet goes a long way, much further than you think. So rather than, and this isn't to say don't be negative, but it's like, rather than spending all of your energy on this quote unquote problematic media, like we can really honestly accomplish a lot more by spending our energy on lifting up those people that are doing things that you specifically want to see. And there's some place for both, but that's really, I think, where we should spend the brunt of our time and our energy.
Yeah. And I always tell people, when you're negative, the only person you hurt is you. Like, there are trolls, right? There are trolls who want you to be angry because they find it funny. There are people who clearly don't understand why you're angry because they just don't have the same perspective on life. And then there are the people who understand why you're angry, but now they're starting to get the brunt of your anger because they're the only ones listening. And then there are the people who agree with you who are also angry. And it's like somewhere else in another room are all the people having a party, the party that you wish that you were invited to. But because you're so focused in this other room with all of these people who may or may not be like-minded, but it's just a hostile environment, it's like you're only just spending your own mental health at this point, and all the negativity just goes back into you. Like, Twitter is a void. Sometimes it comes back at you, but like the more you like, share, and follow people who are doing who only say negative stuff all the time, that's just all you're eating. It's your feed. It's literally called your feed. It's what you're feeding yourself. And so it's like, of course, you're not going to find the stuff that you want if you're not on that kind of feed. And of course, you're not going to see the things being celebrated if you're not on that. And your perspective on everything is going to be totally warped. And that's why, I get a lot of, I get a lot. I said I think because people usually never come at me and tell me these things. But I think some of the backlash that I get is because I'm not upset. In general, my mom once told me I was detached and slightly sociopathic. And it was because I told her I just don't care. And it's not I don't care about the issue. I just don't have the energy to spend on other people's emotional traumas. And I only have the energy to spend on mine, to fix mine. So then I can possibly help someone else through my art or through something else, right? And it's so I can't continue to traumatize myself in order to be a great artist. I could write about trauma, but there's some people who like trauma porn, right? There's some people out there. I don't know if they like emotional trauma porn, but also it's such a warped space to be in. So you're not necessarily coming from a place of truth. You're coming from trauma. Usually we end up wrapping ourselves in a lot of lies to kind of protect ourselves. And we lie about a lot of different things that don't need to be lied about just to make ourselves a point or just to have a point in the argument, right? And I don't know, I feel like there's a whole other space for people to occupy that doesn't need to be positive, because life isn't all positive either, but you can have positive conversations or conversations that are constructive, whether they're positive or not. And you can have nothing but negative experiences. And for me, I always choose to have the one that is least going to give me the most positive outcome, which isn't the negative experiences. Because I don't know, I don't think I'd be able to have the same kind of conversations that I do if I was just angry. I'd say things out of turn. I'd say the wrong things because they're not really how I feel. It's just how I want to feel. I don't know. Like my discussion videos would be a lot different if I was just angry instead of just inquisitive and wondering about a lot of things.
Yeah. For me personally, and I'm not going to say this as like, this is what everyone should do. But for me personally, I have this rule where if I am really feeling upset or angry about something, I will stay away from social media. And I try not to write about it when I'm in that place. I try to make sure that I'm okay with myself first, that I am in a place where I am stable and I am certain in myself. And then I can go and usually what I say is a lot more edifying and it's a lot more meaningful in that place too, when you're not being reactionary and you're able to take a step back and kind of think about things, and you're going to actually see the big picture better. You're going to see whatever that issue is a lot more clearly when you're not in a state of anger. And, anger is very useful. This isn't like anger is bad. It's just that when you're trying to have a conversation.
Yeah, anger prompted you to have this conversation. Like,
yes, it can be the motivator.
Yeah. And I always say, like, especially my diversity videos generally only come up when I feel like I need to speak up about something. Like, I'm never like, like twisting my fingers or like totally calm when I make and or upload these videos. I'm usually like full of like, oh God, should I really do this? I don't know. But like with Blood Air originally, and I even told other people that I wasn't going to comment on it because I didn't have an arc and it was just another issue. And I was just like, this is what happens nowadays. And then I started seeing things that I felt like were anti-immigrant. Like, and I knew that people didn't mean it intentionally, but I could see like, we have like American culture is very anti-immigrant. Like as much as it's because we have to like, I don't want to say that it's out of hate. It's out of the need to get rid of other people's culture so that we can have one single culture in America. And whatever that is, like obviously there's lots of history behind that. But that's, I said it earlier that cultures attack things that are too other so that we can have one mainstream kind of thing. So that's a very anti-immigrant sentiment. And like most countries are like that. I like lived in Japan for a while, extremely anti-immigrant.
Japan's a lot more.
I know. Yeah. Extremely anti-immigrant. Like they like foreign people, but they also want you to go home. And it's because
like, all right, you stay here a while. Okay, now you leave.
Yeah, and it's not like out of maliciousness. They're just confused why you're staying because you're not Japanese. You don't understand their culture. You're not a part of them. And it's very like othering, but at the same time, it's like, it is what it is, right? So it's not, it can feel hurtful to your sensibilities, but is it inherently hurtful or is it just speaking on a truth that you culturally do not belong? And as an American, we're so used to like accepting other cultures and kind of molding things, whereas they're just like, no, this is what it is.
Yeah, there's not even a little bit of a melting pot there.
Yeah, and that's what comes from having a strong culture and like consistently, molding it, right? And the thing that's so different here and like what I saw concerning like Blood Air was that there was a lot of those anti-immigrant sentiments, especially when it comes to China. I mean, like obviously the US and China are consistently at odds, I mean. And so like there's a lot of that we've seen in media. There's a lot that we've seen over news cycles and all sorts of tiny little things that we don't realize that we've been eating and that we've been digesting and that we've internalized because it has nothing to do with us. And those sentiments were starting to crop up. And I was like, you know what? I feel like I should say something because that's wrong. And at least if we're going to be this way, you should know what you're saying, especially if you're going to be someone who stands up for diversity. You should at least know when you're being like, sketchy.
Yeah, it's a little bit hypocritical. Yes.
Yeah. And that's the issue too with being hostile and angry and die by the sword, live by the sword, right? Like, or live by the sword, die by the sword, is that you end up doing those kinds of things. You end up you are a hypocrite. We are walking hypocrites. Like, I don't care who you are prejudiced against something. It could be a dog. It could be rats. I don't care. Like, you are prejudiced against something and it will crop up whenever that conversation crops up and you will be 100% unaware. But somebody else will see you for who you are and for what your culture is. And, do you want to be on the other end of that? Do you want that person to display the same hostilities that you have, like come at you with anger when clearly you're a good, kind person and you just didn't realize it? Or do you want people to come at you with the, like, hey, by the way, we need to have a conversation about that. So it's interesting to me. Like, by the way, all of these conversations I don't think should be had in public. Like when a book is out in the wild, and that's when it comes with like authors, right? Like if you know the author, or if you're like many authors, like it's a small community. They at least know someone who knows the author. Like those kind of conversations need to be had in private. I think when a book is in ARC form, it's a marketing tool. So it's out in the wild. That's not a private conversation, but it's a conversation about the art itself, that book specifically. And like, that's fine to have publicly, but I don't know. I used to be fairly death to the author. I don't think you can kill the author in that sense and be able to have a conversation without the author anymore. But I definitely think that there needs, especially in the industry, like readers can do whatever they want. Right? I mean, like let's be honest, readers will do whatever they want. There's no repercussion to them for like trashing any book on Goodreads or anywhere, right? But like authors in the industry, bloggers who are in the industry, people who like you would consider this person your peer, it's like, man, way to be like, it's like you should be able to have a way to talk about their work without, like, even I find that difficult reviewing books on YouTube while being an author, because I know that at some point in time I might meet this person, or hell, like what if I just so happen to end up with the same editor as this person? Awkward, right? Like I trashed their book and it was edited by my current editor. Oh no, like what happens if you're in a situation like that? Or, even less likely, you're just at a panel and you have to sit next to that person. You should be able to talk about the work for sure. You don't have to keep quiet about things, but you should be able to do so in a respectful manner. Just because you would want someone to afford you that respect, I don't know. That's my opinion.
I think that's true. It's kind of like what you put in is what you get out. And if you're going to go into these things in a kind of aggressive, hostile manner, a lot of negativity, don't be so surprised if you maybe get some of that back.
Yeah. Natural consequences. You cannot avoid a natural consequence. Like it's not even like a threat. That's literally just natural consequences. You always get back exactly what you put out there.
Yep. This has been the longest conversation I've ever had on my podcast, and it could continue to go on. No, it's good. It could continue to go on forever and ever and ever, but I have to end it at some point. So thank you so much for coming on and talking with me about all these things. I'm definitely going to link to some of your videos in the description too, if people want to go in a little bit more deeply, because there's a lot to this. But yeah, also just how can people follow you, keep up with you, all that kind of stuff?
I am Francina Simone on everything. Like you could literally just Google me and like find everything Francina Simone. Yeah. I mean, my best way is probably the YouTube channel, because that's where I like keep most of my opinions. My Twitter is for the most part just me being stupid. So.
All right. That's not the best advertisement, but we'll take it.
It's like if you want to know like my opinion on a current book that I'm reading and like the most like the dumbest like form of gifts, you can follow me on Twitter. But like if you actually want like me, the intellectual me, then it's probably YouTube's the best.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's exciting.
That was my conversation with Francina. Now, you should definitely go check her out on YouTube. She's awesome. I've included some of my favorites of her videos in the show notes, but you can also find her just by searching for Francina Simone. Next time on the podcast, we'll be hearing from Susan Denard to talk about the subjects of witches and intersectionality. And interestingly, she has a bit of a different opinion and different perspective on the subject that Francina and I were discussing. It comes up a little bit in the episode, even though I didn't plan it that way. But yeah, it's interesting. I love to have people with different perspectives on the show. That's definitely something that I value. Until then, this has been the Females in Fantasy podcast. I am Brianna Da Silva. Thanks for listening.